have you here with our first in-person event for 2023. The world changed during COVID. We went on to, webcasts and things, but we were pleased last year to be able to reintroduce face-to-face meetings, but this is our first one for the year. We've received 74 registrations. Isabel likes to keep count of how many people are registered for each event. And it's always great to see the growing interest in the Australian Health Design Council events. So thank you all very much for your participation. As we start this evening's event, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. It's through working with our communities that we can try and achieve address some of the health inequities that our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have experienced. As chair this evening, I would like to thank our sponsors for their continued support for the Australian Health Design Council, our foundation partners In Vitro Technologies, Marquet, and our new sponsor Enware, our industry partners IPG and Cantel, and our event partner Oricon. The topic this evening is about moving beyond tradition in healthcare. I think everybody knows that multiple challenges are facing the health industry, both in Australia and globally, including workforce shortages, the rapid pace of technological changes, the lack of integration and coordination of care, health disparities, pandemics and natural disasters. There's an unquestionable need to reimagine and transform constrained public health systems. We need to focus on services that are human-centred, inclusive and resilient to future shocks. In doing so, there's an urgency to strengthen existing and establish new models of collaboration across professional, institutional and organisational boundaries, which helps to improve healthcare infrastructure. The challenge is enormous, but so is the opportunity. In response to requests from members, we've put together, well, Isabel and her team have put together tonight's event. And I've been asked to remind you that architects, project managers and engineers can claim continuing professional development points for tonight's event, and details can be found in the event invitation email. There's also a barcode that will be shared with attendees on the screen and again at the end of the event tonight. Before we start, I just have to share some housekeeping rules. During and after the panel discussion, attendees will be invited to send their questions using Mentimeter. So you scan the barcode on the screen to log in, or you can go to www.menti.com and key in the code you see on the screen to ask your questions. If you want to ask questions live, put it through and add your name and the city where you're located, and then we'll go to live questions a bit separately to anonymous questions. After the presentations, we encourage you to stay at your venue to share your thoughts with others around and to continue the discussions in an informal setting. The recording of the event will be available the next week on our website for members access only. The discussion session following the event will not be recorded, so just remember that. During this evening's session, we'll be exploring the role of attracting new sources of involvement and investment for the well-being of communities, bringing in diverse skills and expertise, and taking significant strides in digitising public health, in forging strong partnerships, and in the development of health precincts. We'll invite our speakers to lean on their extensive experience in the health industry and reflect on both the challenges and the opportunities that come with moving health precincts from a concept to a viable, valuable health infrastructure asset to support the delivery of more human-centred, inclusive and resilient healthcare that connects up healthcare delivery research, education and innovation. Joining us from Sydney tonight is Dr. Stephen Palmer. Stephen is the Randwick Health and Innovation Precinct Industry and Innovation Lead. He's got more letters in his acronym than I have. After completing his PhD at University College London, Stephen spent over 25 years in academic medical research in both the UK and Australia before joining the Australian biotech company, Casia Therapeutics, and then 2 years leading the life science team at the University of New South Wales Knowledge Exchange before taking up his current role. Originally trained in molecular genetics and the use of genetically modified animals and cells to understand and model human disease, he has acquired skills in commercial health technology R&D, intellectual property management, and business development. From Melbourne, we have Helen Day. She's the Principal Advisor, Strategic Master Plans at the Victorian Health Infrastructure Division. Helen is a recognised strategic design leader with a wealth of experience in shaping and enabling public projects, precincts and policies that make a positive difference to our urban environments. Did you like all those P's? Helen is passionate about innovating with interdisciplinary experts, stakeholders and communities to deliver public infrastructure that can enrich the lives of all people and living environments. Helen is a founding member of the Victorian Design Review Panel and Principal Advisor in the Strategic Master Plans Unit in the recently formed Health Infrastructure Branch in the Department of Health in Victoria. The unit plays an instrumental role in defining the department's priority health infrastructure projects and precincts. We have had a slight change to the announced speaker for Brisbane tonight, and this evening I'm pleased to welcome Louise Cutler, who is the Senior Director, Technical and Assurance in the Health Capital Division of the Queensland Department of Health. Recently appointed to her current role, Louise Cutler and her team work with a range of project stakeholders to develop, implement and monitor Queensland Health's goals for the infrastructure it procures. Louise is an architect with 25 years experience in Australia and abroad. During this time, she's developed a significant portfolio of hospital and healthcare projects. Her work is built on a highly collaborative approach to design and procurement, and she's passionate about delivering great environments for the well-being of all who use them and the communities they serve. Thank you, Louise, for joining us at quite short notice.
My pleasure.
So having introduced our speakers and thanked them very much for making their time available this evening, we've established a series of questions that we're going to run through. And we'll get each of the speakers to talk about these. So we have about 30 minutes on these prepared questions, and then we'll go on to questions that participants around Australia will raise using Mentimeter. So the first topic is looking at new sources of investment. The premise that underpins this is that the future of public health is likely to be shaped by a combination of factors, including getting a lot of noise from somewhere. That's better. Combination of factors, including technological advancements, changes in social and economic conditions, and evolving public health priorities. To ensure that public health initiatives are adequately funded and supported, it's likely to be important to identify and tap into new sources of investment. So the question for the first topic is, what are some of the opportunities you see in the health sector that could leverage acquiring new sources of investment in the public sector? And what are some of the challenges that would arise? And I'm going to go first to Stephen in Sydney to respond to this topic.
Tonight,
I think I need to update my my bio picture. It's looking more unconvincing as compared to the reality. I think so. I guess I'd like to broaden this question a little bit and perhaps not focus just on the investment, but on the opportunity to create a broader understanding of what hospitals should be doing and what we want out of our health services into the future. And that does involve very much changes in technology, changes in the way health service is delivered to try and keep people out of hospitals as much. You know, something that's a strong driving force that occurred during COVID, and that is going to become much more of a reality as we progress. So, you know, mechanisms of remote monitoring, mechanisms for digital health, mechanisms for virtual care, keeping patients out of hospital but well monitored, and health service is very important. So in order to develop that sort of technology, we need to be working very closely with those people who can develop those technologies, have those capabilities, and can support it. I think we also need to be thinking about so that's the technology part of it. The other part is very much around investment, and here I think that the two key words I would highlight, which you've raised already, is collaboration, is absolutely key. And when I'm talking about collaboration, I'm not just talking about collaboration between health services and universities and other public institutions. I'm also talking about collaboration with private industry. And the other part is innovation. I think so. Collaboration and innovation to me are the way in which we will both see cost savings into the future, creating a more efficient health service that is more suited to future purpose, and to creating those sorts of investment that you're talking about. And so from my role very much at the Randwick Health Innovation Precinct is about trying to encourage both collaboration and innovation. There we're looking for trying to encourage opportunities for clinical trials, opportunities for international pharma to come in and do clinical trials. Australia is a very good clinical trials destination, and I think we need to encourage that. We need to be developing technology together, and we need to be open to these ideas. We need to be able to get over some of the historical perspectives we have about dealing with industry. I think, you know, there's a lot of suspicion around clinicians working with industry. There's been a procurement relationship that's evolved over a lot of time, and the opportunity to work together to create new technologies, to implement those technologies. You know, we need to overcome some of those challenges around those prejudices that exist about public and private partnership as well. I'll leave it there, but there's obviously a lot more to it.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Moving down to Helen in Victoria. Helen, do you want to provide some comment on that topic?
Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah. So I think my sense is that there's a real coming of time in a way to the innovation precinct. So I think there has been a real consolidation and a realisation that there's a very significant relationship between, let's just say, the geography and spatial dimension of what we all live and breathe, and that is either a health precinct or something a bit bigger, which could be the innovation precinct. So I think from an investment perspective, what I'm understanding from the likes of the CBREs of the world is that as of the last 4 or 5 years, the investment funds are really backing health and life sciences. And so that kind of bucks, I guess, an assumption that's made often on behalf of government that we're reliant on the public purse to fund into these, health and life science precincts. So staggering statistics are, within the last 4 years, there's been $18 billion of accrued, that's US dollars, accrued worldwide for life science investment. And in the last year alone in the Australasian region, I think it was 770 million has been poured into broadly life science related precincts. So there's, if anything, there's a real shortage at the moment of available accommodation, which is my bias. That's what I live and breathe every day. But there's a shortage of space. So I think that is a real coming of time and something that's really shifting the game. And from what I've understood, the key reasons for that is that the health sector can provide longer lease times of up to 15 years, and it is largely based around very niche specifications. So things like flexible, floor to ceiling heights, 5 metres that can be quickly flipped into startup and incubators and those sorts of entities. So I think for me that's going to be a big shift. And just something else that I suppose is along a similar vein of thinking is the Victorian government have invested $2 billion into a commercially self-sustaining entity called Breakthrough Victoria, which is pretty much charged to fund sort of like almost like an application grant funding system, but fairly substantial bits of money on very early ideas and research, and then filtering from that when it becomes a bit more of a, potentially commercially viable game, then there's an additional bit of funding there, and then when something's actually up and running, then there's another element. And that's really to, I guess, try and fill this gap that's been recognised between ideation phase through to development, translation, clinical trials and commercialisation, which Stephen would be far more equipped to talk about than I am. But to me, I'm quite optimistic that for the innovation and health and life science related precincts, of which hospitals are a key part, there's a big and positive shift.
Thanks very much, Helen. I think the breakthrough funding sounds fascinating, and particularly in the context where many innovators and researchers in Australia have had to go overseas to get implementation. Louise, would you like to?
Sure, where the feedback is coming. Sorry, folks, not sure whether you were experiencing the feedback too.
Well, who's sharing the screen? If Nalene's sharing the screen, can you mute them, please? Save me doing it.
Thanks, Kate. I'm going to follow on from Helen's comments. So my recent experience, as we touched on before, I'm very new in the Health Capital Division at Queensland Health, and some of my recent experience has actually been working with a sophisticated real estate investment trust who specialises in hospital and healthcare, who understand the value of creating healthcare precincts, that the sum of the parts is going to be greater than, is going to give you a greater whole than the sum of the parts. They understand that value proposition. And as Helen mentioned, there are funders that are certainly on board with that proposition in terms of being a good and sound investment with the ability to generate long leases with stable tenants effectively. So this is a space that private industry does want to play in. And I guess, albeit I'm an architect, you do get to perceive some of the frustrations that those sorts of investors have, or those sort of clients who are developers who are looking for those opportunities. You get to perceive some of the frustrations that they have. So I thought I might just comment on some of the barriers that are potentially there around really getting these precincts to do what we need them to do and create some diversity of opportunity in the health ecosystem. Again, you know, there's pieces of work around that it's not a perfect model. When private industry is cherry picking the things it wants to do, it doesn't necessarily serve the greatest need for the greatest people. However, it's certainly not something that should be discounted. And probably if you really want to sort of drop it into a nutshell, it's really barriers around lack of certainty in town planning controls, because as a private investor or developer, you don't necessarily have that automatic ministerial infrastructure designation that might come, or an established state-owned site that has a little bit more freedom around how you move forward with the project. So that's certainly something that, as I guess as a construction industry, that we could have a look at. How do we give those investors more certainty, because that will certainly help them with that decision making around, do I want to invest in this opportunity, and how do I get my stakeholders, my tenants, how do I get my precinct to work with some certainty that I'm going to be able to deliver what I'm promising. And probably the only other thing I'd say is one thing that I'm quite interested in amongst all of this conversation. I think there's a lot of talk about really large scale precincts, and I think there are some profound opportunities that come from that. But just a concept around catalytic investment. So, you know, sort of some of those breakthrough funding type concepts about how do you actually get some of these things to just sort of grow organically from the ground up, and make opportunities for those things to happen. I know at Queensland Health, we recognise that you might be a health hub or a health cluster or a health precinct. And again, that notion that we don't want to just be talking to those really high level sophisticated investors or mature institutional research and education. We do want to create those opportunities that others can come in and do those innovation pieces that are going to turn into something beneficial.
Thanks, Louise. Thanks to our panel. We're going to move on to the second question now. And this is looking at diverse skills and experience. So the premise here is that the future of public health will require the integration of diverse skills and experience from a wide range of disciplines and sectors. By bringing together individuals from fields including medicine, public policy, economics, technology, and environmental science, we can create a more comprehensive and interdisciplinary approach to addressing public health challenges. So the question to the panelists: how, in your opinion, can we embrace diversity to ensure the future of the public health system is more inclusive, human-centred, and resilient? And I'm going to start with Louise this time.
Thanks, Kate. And I guess this follows on from some of the points I was making before about how do we get that diversity in, and opportunities to participate at different financial scales are part of that, but also that idea about who do we need to collaborate with so that we absolutely get the best outcomes that we can about these projects when we talk about them. To draw on my personal experience, I don't think any project works unless you really have that strong vision between a group of diverse people who are working towards a common goal and they understand what they're trying to get from that. So how do you translate that strategy for success onto something that's a much larger scale, where you're actually dealing with organisations as opposed to individuals that are working towards something? But the bottom line is that everybody understands that working together in this way is going to really value add. So that proposition about the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, I think, is really an obvious truth for everybody. Look, when we are talking about precincts and thinking about my role at Queensland Health is a stakeholder that needs to collaborate with others to pursue success in health and knowledge or innovation precincts. So I'll just put a bit of context around that about what does that actually mean for Queensland Health. We have a master planning process, and it actually responds to 4 levels of detail. So level 1 master planning is a state level cross-agency collaboration, and that identifies opportunities for health precincts. So that's very much that really large scale, talking about the major opportunities, and you can point to the Gold Coast or Hurston as places where those sort of aspirations exist and are being delivered. And then we work down to level 4, where we're again sort of talking about that facility level planning. And, you know, I referred to health hubs before, where we're actually saying, well, what is it if it's just this one little community that just has this very sort of discrete set of services in it? How do we bring all of those things under one roof, so that we're delivering the services that a community might need? So yeah, going back to that idea of scale, I think that there's definitely an opportunity at precinct level to establish some of those relationships between our sort of, we were talking before about sophisticated investors, sophisticated developers, mature educational institutions, mature research bodies, because those folks certainly are looking for the same opportunities as we all are to get those results out of these precincts. To that end, Queensland has recently established a Queensland Innovation Precincts and Places strategy, and that's fairly young, if you don't like me in my role, but it does have the sort of those overarching aspirations that I think that we're all looking to see delivered. And as part of that, they have the Office of the Chief Entrepreneur has a panel, which is the Innovation Advisory Panel, and it has volunteers on it that are appointed for a couple of years. So I had a little look at that last night. It's got quite a diverse range of folks on there. There's some entrepreneurs. There's a representative from the Department of Tourism, Innovation and Sport who owns that Innovation Places and Precincts strategy. And we've got some folks from QUT and some folks that represent small business interests. So it's really positive to see that there is that diversity that we're talking about is something that's actually being sought and delivered and established. And then we need to look, as I said, Queensland Health's a stakeholder. So how can Queensland Health then engage with that so that we get this overarching view of how a precinct can best come together to deliver the goals of a range of stakeholders. One other thing I think to point out of the Innovation Precincts and Places strategy is there's quite a lot of thought about governance. And the thing that I took away from that is that when you're talking about these collaborations, there needs to be a bespoke governance model, and that kind of rang true to me. So you're looking at a precinct, it's specific for a purpose, it's specific for a place. So it needs to establish its own governance rules so that it can be agile, it can respond to concerns, and it can be fit for the purpose that it needs to address. And that's, again, sort of talks to that point about how do we get folks to work together. We know that when people work together and they've got that common vision, they can really get something to happen. So I think that's really a key piece, as well as getting those diverse voices, a really key piece about setting up the governance.
Thanks very much, Louise. I'm going to go now to Sydney and Stephen. Stephen, your comments on this topic?
Yeah, thanks. So at the Randwick Health Innovation Precinct, I think one of the key features is the proximity of the health services, the local health district, with the university, and the university can provide a broad range of skills that goes much beyond the medical research, the Faculty of Medicine and Health. It goes into the Faculty of Science, the Business School, Social Policy Research Centre, Art Design and Architecture have a role as well. The Product Design team have a very nice collaboration on developing a trolley that was tracks behind a bed that has a bunch of tools and devices attached to it. So I think there are many opportunities through that collaboration between the university and the hospitals to provide those linkages. And I agree entirely with what Louise was saying about having that governance system at a local level. That's extremely important to understand how that works and how those connections can be created. Something that we've spent the last 2 years doing is putting together a very strong governance mechanism to allow those sorts of discussions to take place and to create an authorising environment that will develop strategy documents that are specific to place, that are specific to the needs of that particular precinct. And that's something that I think is key, that we have to think about with precincts, that not all precincts are the same. Not all precincts have the same abilities and skills. And, there are 4 health and innovation precincts within Sydney alone. And we have to think about, what each of the individual skills are that sit within those particular zones and how they can work together to not only be, of benefit to those particular localities, but also to the state and to the country. So when we think about diversity of skills, we have to also hone in on what are the specific strengths that a particular geographical location has that can then feed into a larger ecosystem.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Great additional insights, and it's nice to hear a little bit more about Randwick. Moving on now to Melbourne and to Helen.
Yeah, that's a good segue too. So similarly across metropolitan Melbourne, we've got a commitment to 6 priority precincts for delivery, and 4 of those have significant health-related entities, acute hospitals attached to them. And as both Louise and Stephen have said, they're all very different in various capacities, from spatial, physical, networking, economic, and their level of maturity. They're all quite different. And I think, everyone's touting their life science kind of brand, but then we go down into the importance then of the public health offerings. So, for example, at Monash, we've got the new Victorian Heart Hospital, and we've got also there a highly developed school of pharmacy, really rated very high in the world. And then we've got the Monash Medical Centre and so on and so on. So that in a way has its own kind of set of strengths that we can build on, and definitely different talents as well. And then going into the very mature and very full and compact Parkville biomedical sort of precinct. We've got the issue there of that being attached to another new precinct of ours called Arden, which is pretty much a brownfield renewal site. So offering a fantastic ability to complement the Parkville precincts in what it can offer in the startup SME space. And picking up on Louise's point, I think is really interesting. There's that fine balance, and it's a question I'm asking daily: what is the role of government in terms of determining some of those sort of requirements, if you like, or asks from various players in precincts, and where do you just take the brake off and make sure that there's the entrepreneurial freedom as well for many and varied things to happen, as Stephen said, just based on what might be completely unseen, but a confluence of various attributes and skills and interests. And I guess to me that is the heart of the innovation. So the innovation is very much around that specialisation, very much in recognition that we're dealing with Australian cities that have very high incomes, have very high skills levels, have abilities and play in a very select group of countries across the globe as well. And for each of those Australian cities to benefit from those innovation precincts, they really have to be quite determined and clear in their vision, not just to investors and health services and hospitals, but to their communities about what's at play. So, and that probably is around that diversity as well. So I think, fortunately, we're in a time now where I think everyone's demanding in each one of those place-based conditions important ability for everyone and anyone to be able to participate in those urban, particularly urban environments too. It's probably it from me.
Thanks very much, Helen. I'm going to go on to our third question now. So the third question is Australia ready? So the topic of health precincts has been attracting much interest in Australia, particularly over the last few years, with many policy makers, investors and health government entities investing in research and planning of health precincts. So the question tonight is, based on the discussion we have had, analysing some of the key enablers for the development of health precincts, in your opinion, is the Australian ecosystem well equipped to create world-class health precincts? What's been done well so far and what can be done better? And I'm going to start with Helen.
Okay, and I'll try and build on what we've already talked about. I think, an optimistic slant. I think absolutely Australia ranks very high in terms of its talent abilities. So when you look across those rankings for commensurate innovation systems in the world, we're up there. We're up there with Cambridge. We're up there. We probably have a critical mass issue in just in terms of population size, but I think possibly some of the challenges for us is that we've come to the innovation. This is my own opinion. We've come to the innovation precinct sort of late in a way, so we're still, and you're seeing it in the Australian government principle statement set up, but we're setting out roadmaps and so on, and that's filtering down. There's a call to action for the states, but I'd say it's sort of at an early stage, and picking up on things like Louise mentioned, things like planning, for example. With the likes of our art precinct, for example, we've got a special use kind of zone emerging there for an innovation precinct. We've certainly got, since our recent change of government, we've got a minister who's wearing a transport and planning hat, and that's, got new legislation through the Suburban Rail Loop Authority, which should certainly start to unlock some of the, typical elements that might, hold up precinct processes. So I think it's in train, and I think Australians do fortunately move quickly, generally on these kind of issues. So hopefully that will stand us in good stead, and I think there's definitely an awareness of what some of the blockers are, and I think it was mentioned before, governance. I think that's the other one. So just, we're seeing various kind of formations of various types of governments, some sort of bottom up, some top down, some quite heavy hitting, like our Breakthrough Victoria. But I think, that's probably also where we've got a little way to go as well. Yeah, thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Helen. So I'm going to summarise your answer as saying yes. Louise, over to you.
I don't think there's ever a good time to start something. I think you should jump in, boots and all, and go as hard as you can. That's my personal view. I'm going to pick up on this idea that we're late and introduce the idea of what's virtual care going to do in this space. So yes, we might be late, but that also means that we're not in a position where we're so used to doing what we already do that we can't pivot towards the impact of perhaps some of the virtual technology that's going to influence the healthcare space. I don't think that's mature. I think that COVID has set us on a pathway that can have some really incredibly positive benefits for a lot of people, particularly in rural and remote communities. So I'm not exactly about precincts, but I would be interested to hear from folks on the floor. If you've got questions around or you've got thoughts around that, I would be interested to open that discussion up. I think that's probably what I've got to add for that question, Kate.
Thanks, Louise. And last comment on this one goes to Sydney and Stephen.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, very complicated question, and I'm not sure I'm in the yes or no camp, really. I think that all the ingredients are there potentially. I'm not sure we've got the recipe right yet. I think there's a huge amount to go, and to a large extent, I do agree with Helen that we are a little late coming to this piece. If we think about some of the benchmarks around the world, probably look to places like Kendall Square in Cambridge/Boston, where that really grew up out of an organic relationship between MIT and Massachusetts General Hospital, and it was only later that all of the other accumulated parts of that precinct grew up around it in rather an organic fashion. I think what we're trying to do in Australia is very much trying to catch up, as Helen would put it, or if you don't mind putting words in your mouth, and create a top-down mechanism. Do it from a government point of view, and that has certain problems because you're trying to impose structures and practices and behaviours on people who aren't necessarily used to it, and to try and encourage a culture change at the coalface, which is not always easy. And people like myself who are trying to experience it every day and trying to persuade people that it's important to collaborate, that precincts are important, to try and talk to clinicians and say, what do you think about the precinct? They'll probably say, well, I don't really care. It doesn't really affect me that much. So we have to kind of, I think it is very much a top-down exercise, and that is a problem. But it's something that's very important, something I feel very passionate about. It is the way forward. And in many, and as I say, I think we do have a lot of really good ingredients. We just need to work out how to do it better.
Fantastic. That's a great note on which to end this particular component. So they are the formal questions that we posed to our panel, but we now have an opportunity for participant questions. Isabel, have we had any come in through Mentimeter to date?
Yes, okay. You have access to Mentimeter. You should have.
Oh, you want me to be on that as well as chairing the session? That's really multitasking. Hang on a sec.
I'm on it if you want.
Alison can help you if you want. Okay.
Robbie's there. Robbie's got it.
Rob's on.
Yeah, those are my questions.
Just go with your questions.
No, it's not good. Oh, it's good.
Okay, so we're going to get started with some of these questions. How does generational and leadership changes also impact the room for growth and the appetite for change? Who'd like to tackle that one? Stephen?
Goodness. In generational and leadership changes. I'm not sure where that's heading, to be honest. Could somebody try and put that in a form that's a little more palatable for me?
I might just add something here. Leadership changes are a challenge to this because you can't get a mature precinct in a parliamentary cycle. So, that's an observation around this and possibly a barrier to really bring to the fullest potential. That notion that you actually do need the top down and bottom up is quite important to this. As for generational change, I think that if you've done a successful job, it should be adaptable because we're talking about projects that have a long lifespan. So if you've gone into this and you haven't considered what the consequences are over a period of time for this diverse cohort of people who may come in contact with your precinct, you probably haven't set yourself up for success.
Okay, that's a good one. Another question we've got is, what are spatial attributes at an urban scale that encourage collaboration and innovation in multi-sector precincts? Helen, I'll go to you first for that one.
Dorothy Dixon, thank you. Well, I think the word is big. Yeah, I think clearly when we're talking about innovation.
You're on mute, Helen, at the moment. Somebody's muted you.
Is it because I'm facing the other way?
Should be right now.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
That's good, because I'm pleasing myself. But yeah, so I think spatially when we're trying to create that kind of knowledge transfer exchange and what I like to call buzz economics. So really that's public space domain where there's a choice about you're going to trade the knowledge or not, trade dependencies of information. And unfortunately we're all back now face to face, so we're experiencing that. I think there would definitely be within the outdoor public domain arena a real curation around sticky spaces. So really that kind of social engineering almost, where spaces are created that are not only qualitatively beautiful and you want to be in and have, you know, the right coffee, of course, but also bring on that kind of ability for people to bump into each other and rub shoulders. So, you know, great space in Melbourne would be the Melbourne University Rabbit Warren, where you just literally moving through that campus through lots of tight spaces and, you know, fantastic for bailing people up and sharing their ideas. So they seem fairly obvious, kind of, they're obvious comments, but I think the interesting one is probably back to that sort of discussion we were having around different types of skill sets and insights and motivations, and when they're brought together across the health sector and then those broader sort of disciplines. So I guess spatially it's interesting to think about what kind of particularly qualitative environments induce that. And then, as we were also talking about before, what kind of technological sort of dimensions and equipment, for example, that we could use to really bring that into play to get that really high quality exchange of ideas and information.
Thanks, Helen. Stephen, from your experience with Randwick, do you want to add any other comments about spatial attributes?
Yeah, well, as Helen was talking, I think, you know, it kind of occurred to me that, you know, that from a geographical point of view, the university is only just across the road from 3 major hospitals: Sydney, you know, Children's, Royal Women's, and the Prince of Wales Hospital, and it's always been that way. And yet the extent of collaboration over the last, you know, 20 years has been pretty limited. You know, the Botany Road might as well have been filled with crocodiles as far as level of collaboration is concerned. And it'll be interesting to see, I think, that some of the building spaces that are going up now, the integrated acute services building, where there's going to be, you know, a CES-led owned property on the front to provide acute services, and then on the back there'll be a UNSW space where there'll be laboratories and staff permanently in there who hopefully will bump into those clinicians. They will be appropriately sited, you know, on each floor so that they have some sort of appropriate skill set that is relevant to what's happening on the front in the hospital, as to how those organic things will develop simply as a consequence of the spatial proximity that, you know, that's even more than it is now. But I can't help thinking that you still need a level of activation. You have to, people need to be forced to work together or have incentives to work together. And once you start working together, that's when you realize opportunities. And that, I think, is the problem. We need to, there's not sufficient investment, and I'm going to get on my high horse now. There's not sufficient investment in creating those sorts of incentives, in activating precincts. Once you build them, you have to activate them.
Yeah, great comments. The next question I find really interesting. Are there any quantifiable data or studies that show a health precinct provides greater outcomes than the sum of its parts? If so, what key lessons can we take from these? Who would like to grapple with that one?
I'll have a crack. So I think it's a tricky one, and it's something we're struggling with at the moment, because it is very difficult to separate out the impact of the precinct versus the impact of the advancement of the individual institutions. So, you know, I think the only thing you can do is to begin at a certain point and say, this is the point at which the precinct was built, and then look year on year as to how that advancement has been impacted by the creation of the precinct. And then hopefully you will see an uptick that correlates with the creation of the precinct or whatever. It's very difficult to actually separate out those different functions according to, you know, the number of research papers that have been produced, the number of patents that have been registered, blah, blah, blah. All of these various different quantities, you can't identify the particular features. And it's something that we're struggling with at the moment. It's something that New South Wales government is struggling with at the moment, because obviously it needs to show, you know, research, the impact of this sort of work. But I think, you know, if you look from a more general perspective, again, coming back to the Kendall Square, when, you know, that collaboration began 30 years ago, it was a hospital, a university that was separated by a river. Now the Kendall Square area, that particular zip code is home to 250 biotechnology companies that have accumulated there because of that proximity and because of the collaboration. So those are metrics that are hard to ignore.
Yeah, I think the Parkville precinct in Melbourne is probably the longest established in Australia, and I think it's demonstrated that it's had some success.
Can I just talk to that one really quickly?
Sure.
Private industry is interested in this, that notion of greater than the sum of the parts. It's because you're going to end up with higher quality tenants with longer leases. So if this wasn't something that was going to add value, private wouldn't be interested. So you can measure it in that really old-fashioned way and just say there's an economic benefit there that private industry can see. How do we demonstrate that through research?
Okay, the next question I've got is, there are so many small health hubs and primary health services popping up in the community. Can they deliver more complex care? Can they keep people out of hospital? Helen, have you had any experience in Victoria with the community hospitals and the...
Yeah, so I mean, I've got a colleague in the room, another colleague in the room. So we've 3 years ago, put in play 10 community hospitals that are geographically spread across metropolitan Melbourne, and they all have an urgent care plan, and they're all very much tailored to suit the needs of those particular places with regard to their health requirements. So I don't think I'm going to get very close. Yeah. So watch this space there. And then the other thing that is a much smaller scale, but it's been very well, very well used, have been our priority primary care centres, which are pretty much, they're based on quite stringent criteria, but they're a grant-based system again. So health services apply to being one of the primary care centres, and recent data I've just seen is, for example, the one that's associated with the hospital has already gone past its 3-year projection, I think, in terms of use just in the last year alone. So really successful, and I have to say probably very good bang for buck for government, really, because there really isn't a capital component. It's much more about the operational funding for those. And then we've got another new one, which is off the back of COVID. I probably could crudely say it's off the back of COVID, but it's mental health and wellbeing model. So very similar model to the care program, but it's a service that's really for that lower acuity mental health, for example, things like anxiety or youth. Actually, I think it's over the age of 18. So, it's quite specific, but it's definitely trying to keep that lower acuity need out of the higher acuity facility.
Thanks, Helen. The next question I've got says, poor housing is a massive contributor to poor physical and mental health, lack of capacity, but also living environments that are suitable for supporting ageing and end of life. Are they worth including into the precinct model? Stephen, has your precinct looked at including living accommodation for either supported ageing or end of life care?
Not at the Randwick site. So SESLED does have aged care facilities based down in Sutherland, specialist care facilities. I suppose my exposure to this, to aged care, is probably more in the innovation sector, where, you know, technology advances are being developed to try and improve quality of life, more independence for as long as possible, you know, in terms of remote monitoring, etc., and again, virtual care type facilities. So, you know, those sort of technological solutions to aged care are something that I'm more commonly exposed to. You know, Randwick's a tricky site. It's very, you know, it's very high value, high priced accommodation. You know, it's not, I think, something that lends itself easily to those sorts of things within the site. We're more, you know, opportunities for remote monitoring, etc., and coordination.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. What are the panelists' views on encouraging private health to tackle all aspects of healthcare services and supporting health equity in regional locations?
Great question.
I find that a bit scary, to be quite honest.
I have to say that in Queensland, we've had a lot of the Queensland public health system seems to be the provider of last resort. So when it's not economically viable for the private sector or the non-government sector to do it, it ends up in the public health bucket. So I don't know if that's replicated in New South Wales and Victoria.
I'd agree with that observation, Kate. Yeah. And certainly the challenges in delivering those remote services, I don't think private's going to step up to that. I mean, it's just be full of frank about that. Unless there's a big incentive on that end. Yeah.
I think the private sector is a contributor to healthcare. I don't think in Australia we're going to get away from the two-tier system, but I think it's got to be complementary services. I doubt that you'll get the private sector doing some of those low numbers, high cost types of services that the public health sector ends up with. The next question is for Stephen. Do patients prefer health services that are care, what works, practice focused, or innovation and clinical trials focused? That's an interesting question.
I'm not sure I'm the best person to speak on behalf of patients. I'm a medical research person, so I'm more about innovation. But I think I think the opportunity to provide better healthcare through innovation is something that patients do care about very much. I mean, I think we consider some of the rarer diseases that I've been involved in working with over the years, in Williams syndrome and various other things where there is not very well catered for. They're often looking for clinical trials overseas because they're not available in Australia. A lot of the patients, a lot of the families of patients who are affected by those particular diseases do see innovation as an opportunity that they do want to pursue, and if they're not available, then they will chase them down. I think the opportunity for clinical trials, again, we're moving into an era where clinical trials will actually become the standard of care, because personalized medicine is becoming a more common feature. That we're moving away from an era where the available chemotherapies for cancer treatment, for example, are no longer what people have an expectation around. They're not that great. They almost kill you as much as they kill the disease. And they're looking for better treatments. And the way in which we advance those treatments is to understand the disease in more critical molecular detail and apply very specific treatments to the individual patient. Now that means that you're not dealing with large groups of patients. You'll do each of those individual patients then becomes almost a clinical trial in itself. And so clinical trials, as I say, are going to become almost like the standard of care. And getting onto clinical trials for cancer patients, if I had cancer, I would be want to be on a clinical trial and having the best available therapies that are available right now, rather than some of the older fashioned style stuff. So I think it's something, new innovations in medicine are something that patients do care about.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Stephen. Another question, really interested to hear the panelists' views on how design can support the future health needs, like the growth in diabetes, obesity, old age, etc. I think from my point of view, a lot of this comes back to our city design. You know, we're designing cities that adversely impact on people's ability to walk. And if you look at the difference between a lot of the European communities and the Australian communities, our city planning is less than optimal for some of those things. Anyway, sorry. Do you want to make a comment on that, Liz?
I was just going to say there's research happening in that space directly to that point about folks with dementia diseases. How do they actually navigate the world outside? Because, you know, the easiest way for people without dementia to deal with that is to keep them indoors. So there's research on that. And, you know, in my role in the technical and assurance team in Queensland Health, we're taking advice from the Queensland Dementia Ageing and Frailty Network around how do we actually make hospitals better, because the hospital cohort users, patients are all ageing. So the average age of our patients is going up. How do we take care of them better? And there's, as I said, research happening on both of those fronts. So we will take that on board to improve the design.
Yeah, and in the sector about design for older age and particularly with dementia, I've been particularly looking to the Netherlands and Europe for a lot of design innovation there. The dementia village that they did there a decade or more ago was a world leader and has been replicated successfully in most states in Australia. I've got another question here. As precincts grow, what allowance is made for accommodation for healthcare and other workers? This issue has been highlighted during the pandemic. Helen, is that something that you're looking at in your planning work in Victoria?
One discussion that's happening is probably one of the precincts that's a clear site at the moment, and I think there's a question mark around what's the kind of economic footprint, if you like, or the health, life science related innovation footprint for this precinct, and then what are going to be the mechanisms to ensure that, for example, housing is proximate but it doesn't start to you know, take up precious compacted floor space, if you like, in that precinct. So back to the comments before around, you know, how can you plan in sort of mechanisms that get you to where you want to go. So in this case, through master planning, housing will be proximate for health workers, but it won't necessarily be in, you know, the prime hospital and other sector related kind of functions. So, but talking to the privates who are doing these full blown health precincts, they all have affordable housing components that for, you know, the more savvy ones, the ones that we've been engaged and talked to, they have housing components. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Helen. Now it is after 7 and I am going to have to wrap up. So I'm going to do one last question because it's politically incorrect. So it says, do our health precinct developments need to transcend election cycles to get optimal outcomes? How could we think about mechanisms for this? Stephen, is that something that you've been grappling with in New South Wales with your development?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a major problem, and I think, you know, it's not just about the election cycle. There's also a lot of inconsistency about who actually within state government should be looking after precincts. You know, we kind of fall between New South Wales Health Infrastructure, the Great East Cities Commission, the Office of Health and Medical Research, the Health. You know, all of these interests, Investment New South Wales, because there's economic opportunities as well. So all of these different parties all have a stake, and there's no real clarity about who should be leading and championing, you know, the precinct narrative. So that's one problem. The other problem is the cycle, and I think, you know, I heard someone from Health Infrastructure say this. So I think saying that government is good at delivering projects, but it's not very good at sustaining, you know, a long-term ideal. So, you know, you can build a building, that's a project, and they can deliver it. But then sustaining a concept is a much more tricky idea, I think.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So on that note, I would like you all to thank our 3 speakers and panellists this evening. So Helen in Melbourne, Stephen in Sydney, and Louise here in Brisbane. Thank you all to all of our attendees. We always thank our speakers for the time and the updates that they've shared. And I'd also like to thank our events subcommittee members, particularly Isabel, who provides such great support to me. I do have a couple of notifications before you all get down into socialising and talking locally. The first is we encourage people to get involved in our AHDC activities. So we invite all members to provide targeted feedback on the development and improvement of the Australasian Health Facility Guidelines. Those of you who've been members for a while will know that we regularly invite representatives from the AusHFGs to come along and give us updates. But the team is currently looking to improve feedback opportunities from industry experts. And as an initial trial, the team is looking to seek feedback from AHDC members on the specific resources currently relating to operating theatres, operating units. A feedback form was shared with our members a couple of weeks ago to provide you with the opportunity to share feedback on the Health Planning Unit 510 operating unit and related standard components. So if you haven't already seen this and you are interested, check the news section on the AHDC website to know more and to get involved. There are 2 upcoming events in May. There's a webinar on the 18th of May at 6 o'clock, and a face-to-face session will be delivered during the Institute for Hospital Engineers Australia's conference on the 29th of May at the Adelaide Convention Centre. So if you keep an eye on your emails or LinkedIn, we'll bring you more details about each event in the next couple of weeks. The next one that we've got coming up is the European Study Tour. So we did our first European Study Tour back in 2019, pre-COVID. And so this is the second one that's been organised. It's running immediately after the European Healthcare Design Conference, what a surprise, from the 14th to the 24th of June. If you've previously registered your interest, you should have received an email providing you with further information. Otherwise, you can find information on LinkedIn or our website. And the last item of update is, after a quite successful initial conference in Melbourne last year, we have decided to try and repeat our success. And the Conference Organising Committee are currently organising the 2023 AHDC conference, which will be held in Melbourne from the 1st to the 3rd of November. You may have already seen the announcement. This year's theme is Designing for Health, No Magic Bullet, where we'll hear from experts in the field on specific topics under the umbrella of the absence of a one-size-fits-all solution to creating healthy, efficient, adaptable and resilient health environments. And the subtopics include designing for recovery, designing for scale, designing for country, and designing for health ecosystems. And it's probably premature and Isabel's going to kick me later, but I'm thrilled to announce that Canadian architect Ty Farrow has accepted our invitation to come and be a keynote speaker. It may end up being virtual depending on his other commitments, but that should be great. So in closing, we're at the end of the formal part of our event tonight. Please feel free to stay in your local environments and to enjoy the networking session with some drinks, nibbles and ongoing chats. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks very much. And thank you for the use of your phone, Robbie.
Oh, no, that's all. You didn't take any pictures, did you?
I didn't know, should I? I didn't read your emails either, but there were a few that popped up.
We're being law manager.
No, just found my calling. Actually, do you know what was my calling? I'll show you.
Just turn us off so that we don't.